Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen. Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. This is the word of God. Thanks be to God. I would traditionally start an event like this with a prayer. You're at a seminary, theological institution. Many of you are gathered because you are people of faith. But I began with this brief lament because my heart is heavy. I'm here because I needed a community. I would say it would be the past 2 weeks that my soul has been crying out to God, but it has been much longer than that. And so as I was trying to articulate all of the different laments, all of the different complaints that I had before God, they reached back a very long time. But the one that kept coming up again and again was the question of people's silence in the face of injustice. And so I started to ask, why was my church silent? Why were my colleagues silent? Why were the people who write my checks silent? Why were some of my friends silent? Why were my neighbors silent when every night I would eat tears with them? And so I started to do the soul searching that I know many of us have done in this room and are doing, asking questions that don't have very easy answers about who we are, but also about our role, our complicity, our silence. Sometimes we don't speak because we don't know what to say. Sometimes we don't act because we don't know what to do. But when we say nothing and we do nothing, we risk being complicit with the very injustice that we claim that we hate. And so with my imperfect words, all of our imperfect words, our imperfect actions, we hope that we have something to say. We hope that there is something that we can do. I have just 3 things I want to share with you tonight, and then we'll move right into the workshops, and I'll tell you about the order of the program and hopefully what we can do today. But there are 3 things I simply wanted to share while we're here in this time together. How can we create spaces for lament? One of the things that's been most frustrating to me as I've been watching the events in Ferguson, as I've been watching the events in Pennsylvania, as I've been watching the events in New York, as I've been watching the nation, the world, is that I have had very little room where I feel that I can lament, where I can mourn, where I can grieve. And as a Black woman living in this particular space, I feel as if I have very little room to grieve, particularly around the issues of racialized violence. What do I do with my grief, and what do I do with my despair in a culture, or even more specifically churches, that are filled with praise and filled with worship, but don't know how to grieve, don't know how to mourn? Where were my wailing women? Where were those willing to rend their garments with me? I called people up on the phone and I said, I'm watching someone who could be my younger brother. I'm watching someone who could be my son. I am watching my nephews, my students, the men, the women that I love. And for hours, this body lying on the ground and bleeding. And I said, I need to grieve. And so I went to church. And that wasn't the space. I don't know if it's because we want to put on our best clothes and our happy faces, but I ask you tonight, if there's anything that we can do with this work of justice, this work of righteousness, it is to create space for lament. People say, what can I do? Well, you can allow people to cry and to grieve without diminishing their grief. Yes, it's bad, but as soon as you say but, you cut off the capacity for people to grieve and mourn. And so, you're tired of the articles, I'm tired of the articles, I'm tired of the Twitter feeds and the Facebook feeds, and yet I understand that this is people's way of grieving and mourning when they have no other space to do so. Allow people to metaphorically tear their garments. The second thing I'd like to share with you, we have to create spaces for real confession. In the liturgy of many mainline churches, including the Presbyterian Church, there's a space in the liturgy in which congregants can confess and then be assured of pardon, assured that their sins are forgiven. But this is a rote confession. This is not the confession of people who really need to do deep soul work, the kind of soul work that tears at you. And so I confess tonight that I am angry. I confess tonight that I am weary and tired. I confess that I am so mad at the criminalization of bodies that look like mine. I confess my anger at the seeming unawareness, systematic racism and injustice in this country. I confess my anger when we care more about traces of weed than we do about bullets in an unarmed body. I confess my anger when I look around me and there aren't enough people that I can reach out to. What I'm suggesting to you about confession is that confession allows us to do some of the soul work of laying bare our vulnerabilities so that there can be, we want to move so quickly to healing. But can we sit with the wound for just a moment? Confession allows that. It is raw. It is rugged. I confess that it is so difficult to deal with the politics of respectability. The many people who at the top of the hour are like, this is horrible, this is an injustice, let's march against it. And then a week later, well, maybe it was me, or maybe he robbed the store, or maybe she did this, or maybe, and then their support for injustice seems to